Thank you, and good afternoon, and welcome back. I know you're having an incredible two-day event here. Of course, I know that this 5th annual conference takes its inspiration from the teachings of the late Walter Linklater. Be a good person, try to live a good life. Like many hundreds, if not thousands, of people on the campus of the University of Saskatchewan, I had the privilege to know the late Walter and to learn from both he and the incredible Maria Linklater. He and Maria led the first pipe ceremony that I ever attended, the first chance I ever had to begin to learn about the significance of Indigenous ceremony. I have been to their home, I have sought guidance from them for students on student matters, and I have been always supported in those requests. I regularly get the chance now to work alongside their son, Lyndon Linklater, who's a dedicated friend and teacher at the university. And when I see him, I always speak about how his parents are part of the foundation of the University of Saskatchewan. The late Walter, Maria Linklater have touched hearts, educated minds, and moved people in ways that make the university what the world needs. I want to just add a personal note. Late last week, I was in City Hospital, walked in the door in the morning, walked out later that day without a gallbladder, happy to say. And I had a moment at City Hospital as I was walking down to surgery. I walked into the elevator, and right at my eye level, was this picture of Walter looking at me. And I have to tell you, it was one of those moments when I knew that everything was going to be okay. I knew that Walter was coming with me into the surgery, into the operating room. I thought maybe when I went under, he might tell jokes to the anesthesiologist and to the surgeon. But I had that sense of peace when people talk about when you go into difficult things and you're able to bring your ancestors with you. I had Walter come with me into that moment, and I was very grateful for that. It's my honor this afternoon to introduce the members of today's youth panel. As you can see in your program, in this plenary discussion, each of these panelists will talk about the role and the impact of traditional teachings in their individual lives, and how these lessons have guided them in the work that they are doing, that they are called to do within their communities. Let me begin by welcoming Regan Ratmispinas to the stage. Regan. Regan will be the moderator today. Regan will be today's moderator. I know him well. Through his student leadership roles, multiple roles he has played, most recently serving as the president of the University of Saskatchewan Students' Union, the 5th Indigenous president over a period of the last 8 years. This is a person who is wholly dedicated to community, who I have seen firsthand look for ways to bring in and share traditional teachings that are part of his life and bring that into the lives of others around him. He is an outstanding choice as moderator.
Thank you.
The panel today will also feature Andre Baer. Welcome, Andre. Andre graduated from the University of Saskatchewan with a B.Ed, and he is now pursuing a law degree. Quite the powerful combination for Andre Baer. We welcome him to the stage. And I don't know, Andre, if you want to maybe have a seat. That'd be great. You will also hear today from Autumn LaRose Smith. Hey. Yay! Currently a student in the SUNTEP program, and I am thrilled to say, in case you're not following news at the university, Autumn was recently elected as our Vice President of Student Affairs for the University of Saskatchewan Students' Union. Kennedy Q-Step will share her experiences with you this afternoon. Kennedy is majoring in political studies with a minor in international studies and Indigenous governance. And finally, the panel will be rounded out today with the wonderful Kaylee Olson, youth advocate and fancy shawl dancer.
Hey.
So full disclosure, when I was looking at the program and looking at these incredible people, I thought to myself, maybe my best move today will be to recruit Kaylee to the University of Saskatchewan. We've got Andre, we've got all these people. So, you know, I may try to still do that yet. But in seriousness, while it is easy for me to introduce them with reference to their educational roles, their post-secondary roles, I can see, and you will see, that they are all inspired leaders who are motivating others by working towards meaningful change within the community through their advocacy work. And I know that this afternoon you're going to hear much thoughtfulness and much reflection from each of these speakers about their views on reconciliation and how they are using traditional teachings to guide their daily lives. And given the wide, and I must say, extensive experiences that these panelists have, it's entirely likely that you're going to hear about leadership, volunteerism, community advocacy, female empowerment. It promises to be a full and engaging session, and I thank them for their willingness to share their experiences with all of us today. And I turn it over to our wonderful moderator.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Patty, and I can't say how happy I am to represent the University of Saskatchewan here. Tantse Gakio, my name is Regan Rat Mispanas, and I am the 5th Indigenous President of the University of Saskatchewan Students' Union. Thank you. Thank you very much. In the 110 years that this organization has existed, I am the 5th Indigenous person to take up this role. And that is the first part of these types of things, my friends, is taking up that space and making sure that our voices are heard at the tables that they weren't heard at for a long time. And I want to say how grateful I am to serve alongside such wonderful panelists this afternoon and a great table of such wonderful voices who are very passionate about the topics that we'll be speaking about this afternoon. And with that, we'll head straight into it. So I want to give an opportunity for each of the panelists to kind of share a little bit about themselves, to introduce themselves to you folks, and as well in this part, can they also share a little bit about the pronouns that they prefer, just so that we can have that during the duration of this panel. So we'll start off with Kaylee.
Hi, can you guys hear me? So my name is Kaylee Olson, I'm 18 years old, and I'm studying right now in Victim Services through Sask Polytechnic, and I live in Moose Jaw. My home reserve is Whitecap First Nation, and I'm very proud to be from there. As a little girl, I was given my traditional Indian name, which is Beautiful Thunder Voice Woman, and it's Wîcihitowin. And I carry that name right with my heart whenever I speak in my everyday life, and I'm very grateful for that name and the people I'm surrounded by. And so what has really made me passionate about public speaking and bringing awareness to some of our social issues is that my family had attended these residential schools and they were never able to use their voice. And my Kushi, which is grandmother in my Dakota language, she even tells me that she's not able to share those stories with others. So when I'm here and anywhere else sharing these stories, I share them for her and my other family members in the spirit world. Thank you. Tamie.
Thank you, Kaylee. And we'll go over to Kennedy.
That's me. Hi, my name is Kennedy
Thank you.
Q-Step. Oh, can you guys hear me now? Okay, that's really loud. My name is Kennedy Q-Step, and I'm just gonna address the elephant in the room. Yes, I am Neil Q-Step's daughter, but I earned the right to be here. This isn't nepotism, I promise. So I am 19 years old, and I'm a third-year university student, and I'm majoring in political science with a focus on international studies and Indigenous governance, which of course, as you know, is a really big topic, and it's not just one thing that you can learn in a colonial institution, which I'm really excited to talk about today. So I come from a family of, and I have 7 younger siblings, and 1 older who's right there actually helping. And I really dedicate my life to advocacy and my education so I can make the future better for them. They're my inspiration, they're the reason that I hold my head high, which I once wasn't able to do. And I am from Fishing Lake First Nation, but I live here in Saskatoon. And yeah, I'm just really excited to be here. And I'm also I identify as two-spirit. I don't really let gender define who I date. And I guess that just adds to the intersectionalities that I face in life that give me a very unique worldview walking in this colonial setting. So I'm excited to, again, talk about that today. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll go over to Autumn.
Hello? Okay. Hello, my name is Autumn LaRose-Smith. I'm a queer Métis woman in Saskatchewan Urban Native Teachers Education Program, SUNTEP, here in Saskatoon. Born and raised in Saskatoon by my beautiful mother who's sitting at that table over there. If you want to raise your hand. Ooh, look at her. She's so beautiful. So I'm currently a fourth-year education student and newly elected VP Student Affairs with the University of Saskatchewan Students' Union as well. So today was my second day on the job. Just wanted to apologize really quickly. I have bronchitis right now, and I will probably be coughing and blowing my nose on stage. So please just ignore that. And yeah, just active volunteer in my community. I always joke and say volunteering is my hobby. I don't know what I would do without being able to go into different roles in the community and help out where I can. And I'm really excited and honored to be here today. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you, Autumn. And we'll head over to our last but not least, our panelist, Andre Baer.
Danse niwagumagantik, kitananaskom tinawal kakyo, nanaskamon mamo taimo simanto igualgaimo iski, nanaskamon shumno no kumno xeno wakasagi ten miste mias miste pamatswin. Andre Baer and Sigasan waskiju sikostinia. Hello, my friends, my relatives, nanaskamon tawiek. Thank you for listening to me. I'm from both the Little Pine First Nation and the Canoe Lake First Nation. First of all, I wanted to acknowledge the late Walter Linklater and all of the teachings that he's left behind. I also want to acknowledge the late Armand Ketchamunye that had passed away from the First Nations University of Canada. I believe he was a helper there as well. Thirdly, I'd like to acknowledge the grade 9 classroom at St. Francis School, the Nahio 9, I think they call themselves. Hey. Thanks for coming. So in 2016, at 21 years old, I was appointed by the federal cabinet minister, Carolyn Bennett, to Call to Action 66 to implement youth programming across the country. And to do that, we co-founded a network called Indigenous Youth Voices in Ottawa. And so from there, I was accepted into law school, and I'm doing a combined Master's of Business Administration at the University of Saskatchewan. And today I identify as two-spirited, and I believe that's important because there could be young people out there who might identify as two-spirited as well, that might want to see themselves represented in either government, in the Assembly of First Nations, in FSIN, in law school, in all of these spaces. So thank you for having me.
Awesome. Big round of applause for all of our wonderful panelists this afternoon. We were able to meet as a group together and share a meal with one another. And we were able to kind of go over a lot of the questions that we wanted folks to really hear about and the types of topics that we wanted folks to take away from today's panel. And so with work from our wonderful panelists, we were able to come up with a series of questions that range from racism to decolonization. And so this afternoon, my friends, you're in for a wonderful treat, and I can't say how happy I am to see all of our relatives, all our cousins here at TCU Place. So we'll start off with the first question. As an Indigenous person, how do you live with racism while still practicing traditional and positive strategies for living a healthy and positive lifestyle? And we'll start off with Andre.
Thank you. Okay, so clearly and explicitly I want to share that racism isn't always acknowledged in this country in the way that it should be. And speaking from experience working with the Government of Canada, I can say that Indigenous peoples in this country are detrimentally underfunded in every single sector of government. And even to this day, the federal government has refused to withhold its integrity in honoring the funding for First Nations children in foster care. And so racism for Indigenous peoples is not only the comments that you hear or the comments that you see online, it's how we are treated systemically and institutionalized in this country. And so it's difficult for us as Indigenous people to withhold our integrity in who we are, and we owe it to our elders, like the late Walter Linklater, to use those teachings and to return to our ceremonies and to uphold the Creator's laws in every single way that we can in a society that doesn't, to this very moment, accept who we are. And I think that needs to be realized and that needs to be known throughout this country.
Thank you so much, Andre. And we'll move down to Autumn.
For sure. So one thing with this, I always like to acknowledge maybe my white passing privilege in situations like this, because a lot of times people don't know I'm Métis unless I explicitly tell them, or I'm wearing like my beaded like Métis flag earrings or something like that, or my sash. For example, I had this one time I was at a conference and I had this woman come up to me and she had said something that was outwardly racist towards the Indigenous people at the conference, and I had to. It was weird being on the outside, kind of feeling like a spy almost, and having her talk to me as if I wasn't Métis because she didn't know. Which is really funny because I had my sash sitting on the chair at the table, and I just had put it down really quickly to go get something. And I had to stop her, and I really had to actively challenge her racism in that spot, and then afterwards let her know that I was Métis, and the fact that she just had come up to me and said something because she thought that I was that I wasn't, and that was really one of the memories that I'll hold forever in that, and how powerful maybe my white passing privilege is in that is that I can actively work as a spy. I think I'm probably the most, the people on this panel, they're all visibly Indigenous, and I know I've got those high cheekbones and my brown saucer eyes, but I don't think many people would realize that I was Métis without my sash. So that's one of the things that I say to everyone is, it's not enough to just be not racist. You have to actively challenge racism in all places, even if it's uncomfortable, and even if it's at the supper table for Thanksgiving supper. I don't think that you can just let it go, because I think that it'll snowball otherwise. And if you let someone say something, just a quick saying that's outwardly racist, and you just let that go by, how many times is that going to be repeated, and to who? And I think that we need to stop it and nip it in the butt where it is. So,
thank you, Autumn. Such a true statement. Thank you. And we'll move on to Kennedy.
Okay. So I'd like to start off by saying racism, it's very easy to just look at the word and say, oh, that's when people don't like natives, huh? Or that's when people don't like people of color. But racism comes in many different forms. And as Autumn said, it's not enough to be not racist. You have to be anti-racist. But again, a lot of times racism is it's not static, it's really dynamic, and people don't even realize that they are being racist or living that colonial lifestyle that instills this system of, again, like oppression towards Indigenous peoples. And both of my parents are residential school survivors, so I definitely want to honor them. But also, just because people aren't being systematically put into these schools anymore doesn't mean that systematic oppression does not face every single one of us. And an example that I always like to pull on is, growing up, I was the only Indigenous person in the room. Through elementary school, high school, and in university, I'm the only one in the room. This is the very first time in my entire life that I'm on a panel with 4 other educated, in these higher institutions, Indigenous people. And that isn't our fault. That isn't Indigenous people's fault. That's the fault of the system that is not open and inclusive to people like me, to people who look like me, I guess. I am very privileged in that sense that I am able to make myself palatable to white people, and that shouldn't be a privilege. That isn't a privilege, but people like to look at me and say, oh, you're not like other natives. Oh, it's okay. Oh, you're not native. And because you're so pretty, or because you're so smart. And it's like, those aren't traits that are white traits. Eloquence is not a white trait. Beauty is not a white trait. You know, every single positive trait is not a colonial trait. And the one thing that helped me live a good life and go through the world experiencing racism is acknowledging that I am not the only victim of this colonial society, but it's also the people who impose those negative stereotypes upon me. And it took me a long time, but it was very, very helpful to switch the narrative. And instead of saying, why do people look at me and think that I'm ugly? Instead, I look at it and say, that's really, really sad that you can look at this beautiful, dynamic, diverse group of people and instantly only see bad. All of the wasted potential you see, that is sad for you. That is not sad for me, because I know that I am bigger than that and I'm above that. And that's what I've learned by embracing my spirituality. And another thing that even just things have taught me, it's not someone just saying, I hate natives. Even it's just the things that are ingrained, the shame that is ingrained in children at a young age. This is the very first time I'm wearing clothing that represents my culture. I'm in a beautiful ribbon skirt, I'm wearing moccasins, I'm wearing beads, and I feel beautiful. And I never thought that I'd feel beautiful in my own traditional clothing because I was shamed and I was taught to think that it was ugly. But what has helped me overcome living in a racist society is regaining and realizing that these bad traits are not indigenous traits. These are colonial traits that were imposed on us, and the real beauty and the real, I guess, meaning of life does come from our traditional ways. And it's taking back the narrative, and that being indigenous, even the word, is imposed on us by white people. It almost transcends society, it transcends the earth, it's in the universe, it's magic, and we're taking it back. And that's just what helps me live every day, is that we are above this, and it makes me feel very powerful.
Wow, beautiful words. Beauty is not a colonial trait. That is something to take note of, folks. Beauty is not a colonial trait. And we'll move over to Kaylee.
So how I deal with racism while still practicing my traditional ways and positive strategies for positive lifestyle. So growing up, I didn't exactly know that I was Indigenous. I knew that I was Indigenous, but it was more so the classmates, and like Kennedy, I was the only Indigenous person in that classroom, so I didn't really know right from wrong at that time. But as growing up, people started telling you that you were Indigenous and the wrong things that you were as being Indigenous. I remember it was grade 5, and my mom, she went up to L'Orange, and she bought me these beautiful moccasins. They were made from an elder, and they were handmade, and they were smoked in the tan hide. And I wore them to school, and remember these girls, they were plugging their noses saying they smelled like bacon, and I smelled like bacon. And I was so upset. I was like, what do you mean they smell like bacon? Like, these are my moccasins, like I love them. And I took them off that day, and I didn't wear them again probably until I was in grade 9. And I was in grade 6 when it happened to me. And it really affects you, especially as a young person, because you're still trying to grow up and realize who you are as a person. And obviously you have your family who supports you. But when you go to school majority of the time, you don't feel that support from others. And I know I was terrified of those girls. And as I grew up, those stereotypes just kept on getting worse. In grade 8, I actually got asked to go kill myself because I was an Indian, go die. And those are horrible things you can say to a person, and especially Indigenous person, because, you know, we face so many different obstacles as compared to settlers, and people really don't understand that sometimes. Like, I think they think that we have no souls and no hearts, but they really need to open up and think that we are people and we do care, and we're the most loving people out there. And so I guess how I really face that with racism in my traditional ways is because once I put those moccasins back on, then I started smudging, I started dancing again, I started praying. So that's when it really helped me. You take that first step, and your traditional teachings, they take you into so many places, and that's why I'm here today. If it wasn't for my traditional teachings, I don't know where I would be. So racism is something that's very hard, but you can overcome it, and those traditional teachings can go a very long way. Thank you.
Wow. And that is a perfect segue into our second question. And the common theme that I keep hearing, I think, is systemic racism and how it becomes internalized, and how as individuals growing up as Indigenous people, how quickly we become in that way of thinking that we're not worth it. So it's very powerful. Thank you so much for sharing your stories in that. The next question that I have for you folks is, how have traditional values and your Indigenous identity helped in your healing process from intergenerational traumas? And we'll start off here with Autumn.
Thank you, Regan, for facilitating this panel as well. How have my traditional values helped with my Indigenous, and my Indigenous identity helped in my the process of healing intergenerational traumas? Growing up, I knew that I was Métis. It was never a word, or it was never something that was hidden in my household. However, I didn't necessarily grow up with those cultural teachings of medicine, and my mom always had a sash hanging on the door, and I knew that that was something that Métis people wore, but I didn't necessarily know the history of it or why. And I have a memory of being in grade 4. Grade 4 is in the Saskatchewan curriculum is when you start learning more about the history of Métis people, and I knew that I was Métis, and my teacher had brought up that we were going to start learning about it, and I was so excited, and I shouted, I was like, I'm Métis, and then I ended up becoming kind of like the poster child for like a Métis person in that class, and was quickly embarrassed to then realize, oh, I actually don't know anything about what that means. And it wasn't until I've kind of took control of my journey with that until I went into Suntep here in Saskatoon and learned more about Métis history and culture, that I kind of started to heal from those intergenerational traumas. And one thing, for example, in our second year at Suntep, we go to Manitoba and we go through the archives, and we create a genealogy of our family, and we write a paper about kind of what being Métis means to me. And so when I was doing that, and I was reading kind of how about how Métis people were and what values they hold to them, I realized that I had those values growing up, but they've always been a part of me, especially something that I didn't know was necessarily like an Indigenous or a Métis trait was humor, and how humor has helped me heal throughout my life. And it wasn't until then where I was like, oh, I had all of those cultural teachings from my mom and from my family, but they were never, they were just how I grew up. They were never presented in a way that was something different. And that was something that once I was able to clue in that and make that connection, I think that really helped me heal. I wasn't separated from this. I've always grown up in this, but now I'm learning to be proud that those parts of me are my Métis culture and history, and I think that's what's helped me heal through those intergenerational traumas. Yeah. Wow. Thank you.
Thank you, Autumn. Kennedy, would you like to answer the question next on how traditional values and your Indigenous identity have helped you heal from intergenerational traumas?
Okay, so I want to bring attention to, was it the people in blue who we go to if they need supports? The people in blue? Okay, so I'd like to firstly say a trigger warning, because I know that intergenerational trauma is a very triggering thing. This talks about thoughts of suicide and alcoholism and drug abuse. So if that does in a way trigger you, I'd like to highlight that those are the sources that you can go to, or you can step out, because I will be addressing those in my answer. So what comes with intergenerational trauma is, of course, unresolved emotions, pent-up rage, pent-up shame, and again, both of my parents have experienced residential schools and have had really difficult pasts, but have overcome them. But that still doesn't mean that any of us are exempt from the, traumas that come from those really traumatic events. And I know that those have affected me in many ways. And that has come with, again, a lot of mental health issues and alcoholism and drug abuse, because I was in a very, very dark time last year. And I'd like to highlight that though I'm sitting up here proud in my clothes, in my identity, saying that I'm Saulteaux, Ojibwe, Anishinaabe, saying all that stuff, and I seem very proud, and I am, but that's only a very recent thing for me because, again, I was always in a dark place, and growing up, I've experienced things like anxiety and depression because that's only normal in this setting that was built to work against you. It's not my own fault, but it's being, again, shamed and just constantly told you're not good enough in this world. And of course, that would be ingrained in us. Of course, it's ingrained in our kids and me. And throughout the years, again, I was taught that that was my fault, that my depression happened because I'm Indigenous, I'm ugly because I'm Indigenous. And I remember one time I told my dad, Dad, I don't think I believe. I don't think that I believe in my culture. I don't think I believe in God. I don't think I believe in anything because how could God exist when I feel this way and that I'm treated this way in my schools, by teachers, by servers in restaurants, why I'm being followed? My presence is bad. I am bad. I am a disgrace to society. So how could a God exist? And for many, many years, that plagued my spirit and that plagued my soul, and I just felt dirty being in my skin. And I believe that that's a common occurrence among Indigenous peoples, and that's why the suicide rates are so high. It's not just about because someone comes up to me and says, you dirty native, I hate you. It's every single day, every single moments that perpetuate racist ideals, and that comes from microaggressions, again, full-out things, even just acceptance rates into universities and schools, and acceptance from peers. But how my Indigenous identity really helped me was, again, I'd like to give a trigger warning, is that in about, I think it was March, I actually attempted suicide. And I was laying in the bathtub, and I thought, something in the back of my head, though, told me as I was starting to slowly fade was I wasn't gonna die right now. Something told me, and I believe that it was my ancestors. They told me, your time is not up yet. You still have work to do. You have a job, you have a purpose on this earth. And so happened how they found me, the stars aligned. No one was home. No one was supposed to be home. My mom's phone was broken, and it was broken, but for 1 second it turned on, and she happened to message me, and I happened to reply saying I'm sorry, saying goodbye. And my dad wasn't supposed to be home, but for some reason, the stars aligned and he came home and he got me out of that bathtub and he phoned the ambulance and I survived. And throughout the hospital, I just started to realize, I didn't even start to realize then. I didn't think about anything then. I was out of it, you know. But it wasn't until after I left, somehow my worldview just changed, it shifted. I don't know why, just like a 180, completely changed. It wasn't even something that I thought manually. It was something spiritually inside of me that just changed and it says I'm not supposed to go anymore. And it was the moment that hit me in that bathtub that I knew that I can't do this again, that no matter how much I don't want to breathe right now, no matter how much I don't want to face the next day, I have to because I have a job and I have little ones looking out for me. So I have to take this and I have to work hard to push through it, just like all of my ancestors did for me. And again, I started to pray, and the very next day, I was gifted my own bundle. And I always thought that my identity was ugly and wrong, but for some reason I cried. I just cried, and I was so, so honored, and I knew that this is mine. And even if I do it wrong, even if I feel like I don't know what I'm doing, I earned that right, and it's mine. And I can take this God who loves me unconditionally for who I am, and now I can see the world differently because I know how beautiful it is despite all of the things that I've gone through. And I see that every single day in my parents' smile and all of my little siblings coming home from school happy, having a different experience from me. And the very second thing they say is, like my little sister, she says, my name is Lily and I'm a Anishinaabe. That comes right after her name. So when people think about, what can we do? Do you think racism can be solved in your lifetime? Do you think decolonization can happen in your lifetime? I see it. I see it every single day. The way that I'm in university, the way that my siblings are coming home happy, it's happening. And that gives me hope that I've never had, and I found that in my Indigenous identity.
Beautiful. Thank you, Kennedy. Thank you for sharing that powerful story. And the one thing that I really caught on to is when you said, because my ancestors did that for me. And I think that's important as we have many little relatives that we have here in the crowd today that come from different schools. Thank you so much to our panelists for wanting to be good relatives for the younger ones that are to come. And with that, Kaylee, if you wanted to share on your experience.
Thanks for sharing, Kennedy. It takes a lot of courage. So, how my traditional values and Indigenous helped in my healing process from intergenerational trauma is, so like I had mentioned before, I was bullied lots in elementary school, probably from grade 6 to grade 8. And so at this point in grade 8, there may also be a trigger warning as well for this. In grade 8, I was at a very low point in my life. That's where I got bullied the most. And I never told my parents about this stuff. Probably about a year later is when I had told my mom. But one night, I was in my bedroom, and everybody was home, but I was just in my bedroom, and these suicidal thoughts did start coming to my head because I'm an Indian, I shouldn't be alive, and all those horrible stereotypes that you just believe that are in your mind, and you just think that is so true. You just feel so sad inside. And at that point, I would have been 13 years old. And looking back, it's like, if I ever have a child, like, I do not want her or him to feel that at that young of an age. That is just horrible. And I hope this will never happen to my children. But I was lying there in my bed, and I just kept on having these thoughts, and I went to bed that night, actually, and I actually had a spiritual dream. And in our culture, dreams are very important. And I never had one of these dreams before. So in this dream, this woman, she had came to me, and her name was Val, and I never knew who this Val lady was, but in this dream, I still remember it like it was yesterday. She came to me, and she was talking, and she was saying all these things, and she was showing me things in this dream. And the next morning, I woke up and upstairs and asked my mom, I said, "Who's Val?" And she goes, "What do you mean, who's Val?" I said, "Well, there was this lady named Val in my dream." And she said, "Oh, well, you have an Aunt Val, but she passed away when you were young." And so my Aunt Val, she actually attended residential schools. And when she got out of these schools, she turned to substance abuse and alcoholism. And at this point, she had already had 3 children, and she had died at a young age. And so I never knew who this lady was, but when she came to me in my dream, I knew that I had to honor her in her spirit, and I knew she gave me the reason that I need to be alive. If it wasn't for her, I would not be here. So I always say that my Aunt Val had saved my life, and now for these opportunities, not only do I speak for myself, my own healing process, but I speak for my Aunt Val. She went to those schools, and she wasn't able to use her voice. And now 2 out of 3 of the children, 2 of them, they live in poverty, and they also have substance abuse. And the third one, my Kushi had adopted. And so again, with intergenerational trauma, it affects them. And then if they have children, it affects them as well. So just like my father, he was an alcoholic. And when I was growing up, I had saw that. So it affected me. And so that's my story with intergenerational trauma. And so now with my traditional teachings, I actually have my regalia dedicated to my Aunt Val. And her favorite color was yellow, and I'm a fancy shawl dancer. So in my shawl, it's wrapped with yellow inside, so she's always with me. So I always say that my Aunt Val is always with me, and just to honor her spirit. Thank you.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much, Kaylee. Keep dancing, my friend. Keep dancing. And we'll move on to Andre.
I can honestly say that I think this is the most amazing panel that I've ever experienced. So congratulations, ladies. Good job. So first of all, I'd like to mention that in our ceremonies, directly from the spirit world, we often get messages and we're informed of different things. And one of those things that we were informed about was suicide. And it was suicide of our young people in our communities. And we had asked why. Why do we have such high rates? What's the problem? How do we solve this? How do we cure this? And the message that came from the spirit world directly was that we need to bring our youth and our children back to our ceremonies. And that's the bottom line, and that's the truth. And there's all of these ways that I could try to solve these problems when it comes to advocating for our youth. It doesn't matter what I could say or do with the government of Canada or the Supreme Court of Canada. What it comes down to is that we need to go back into our lodges. We need to believe in the Creator and remember who we are. And so I'd like to share a quick story when it comes to the traditional teachings that we carry. My late father had passed away in February of 2017. His name was John Sugar. His Indian name was Wambli Makbia Naji. And he had taught me ever since I was 18 years old. I did not grow up with my ceremonies. I did not grow up with my language. I did not grow up in any way traditional. However, when I became a man around the age of 18 years old, I took it upon myself that I needed to learn these things. I owed it to my ancestors to learn these ceremonies. And I started to work with him. And something that he had always told me was akamemok. And so if you heard the main plenary this morning, I think it was Team Akamemok that presented. And so he would tell me that. He would say akamemok. And there was one time where a friend of mine who was a powwow dancer, speaking of powwow dancing, she told me a story about a young grass dancer that danced at the Gathering of Nations. And maybe some of you have heard this story, but from what I was told was that his mother had passed away before he was going to dance at the Gathering of Nations. And what had happened was that there was a drum group, and I'm not sure which one, but they made a song for him. And they wanted him to keep going despite the passing of his mother. They wanted him to succeed. They wanted to see him dance, and so they made the song. And I won't sing it for you right now, but it has the word akamemok in it, and it means, and in the song they say, keep going, do this for your mother, we all love you. And so hearing that story and knowing that my dad had told me that every single day, I actually got the word akamemok tattooed on my neck here, and it's in syllabics. And so I think it's a really powerful reminder for all of us that no matter how bad things get, the Creator has a purpose for each and every one of us, and we need to keep going for our children and future generations.
Thank you, Andre. That is definitely a piece that people can take away from in their daily lives, is to agamemo, to keep going, to persevere through a lot of the tough things that might happen or occur in our lives throughout the daily. And each of our panelists are all post-secondary students. Each of them are trying to obtain a degree or a certificate in their respective fields. And so this question kind of touches on that. The question is, what are your lived experiences as an Indigenous person seeking post-secondary education? Do you find there is a compromise to your Indigenous identity while attending post-secondary? And we'll start off with Kennedy.
Again, first off, I want to highlight the importance of not looking at it just as a university, but as a colonial institution. And that every single way in which we live our lives in Canada is a colonial way, other than when we take upon ourselves to learn our traditions and try to go back to old ways. But for the most part, in order to make it in the society, again, like I mentioned before, you have to make yourself palatable to white people. Sad as it is, it's just exactly how the system was built and how it has been continuously upheld even until today. So of course, I've had to sacrifice aspects of my Indigenous identity, even by becoming there, even with the language that I speak. And it's funny because I was looking at, one of the airlines was sued, I'm pretty sure it was Air Canada, because one of the things wasn't in French, and the French in Canada just went insane. They're like, how could you ignore my language? And I'm like, wow, yep, I relate, but yeah, I don't know. It's just like, there's so much that we have to compromise every single day. And again, as I mentioned before, I'm the only Indigenous person in the room in a lot of my classes, and like Autumn mentioned before, you become a spokesperson for what an Indigenous person should be. And living in Saskatoon specifically, people can't believe that I'm something that isn't Cree. And here's a story. One time when I was working at McDonald's back when I was like 14, 15, this guy came up to me and he's like, oh, do you speak Japanese? And I'm like, I'm not Japanese. And he's like, well, why do you speak so like this? Oh, are you Filipino? Do you speak Tagalog? And I'm like, no, I don't. I'm Indigenous. Oh, do you speak Cree? And I'm like, no, I'm not Cree. And then he's like, oh, well, have a nice day. He gave up and he left because people just can't wrap their heads around that there's hundreds of nations and hundreds of languages and hundreds of different cultures under this branch of Indigenous. And under these institutions, they're taught as an elective. That's all it is. And people don't realize that we're all treaty people and we're all victims of colonization, and that it's not just an Indigenous thing, and that reconciliation isn't just an Indigenous thing, but it's actually turning the narrative around and realizing that it's the job of settlers to educate themselves. It's the jobs of other people to like educate themselves. And for a lot of times within the institutions, people look at me and expect me to explain why Indigenous people deserve rights. And I'm like, are you joking? How old are you? Like, this is 2019. I shouldn't have to explain why I deserve to drink water, why I deserve to have a political voice in this world when the Indigenous population is growing every single day. Like, something that I realized that helped me survive in these institutions is realizing that it's not my job to advocate that I should be alive. It becomes exhausting really, really fast. And what I want to emphasize today is that every single person, white person, has to take initiative to educate themselves, because no matter how much you want to say, I'm not racist, oh, this is what my company has done. First of all, your company is colonial. You live in these houses and you live these everyday lives, these things that you don't even realize you do. They're all not, how do I say this? How can I say to educate yourself and then say that it's not my job to educate you? You know, find someone who wants to. I don't want to, I'm too tired. But anyway, yeah, like, of course I've sacrificed my Indigenous identity. So at this point, I feel like being the token Indigenous person becomes kind of a cool thing because no one knows. And that's sad. And I want people to be educated and I want them to know about my culture, but I can just say something and then of course my teachers are so impressed. I'm like, you know, in my culture, everyone's equal. And they're like, oh my God, that's so progressive. Oh my God, she's so smart. And I'm just like, ugh. It's infuriating. So basically, when I think about my institution, it's annoying. It's annoying. And it feels like especially sociology, so annoyed at sociology. I can go on an entire rant here of why I'm annoyed by like institutions. But anyway, sociology gets anthropology. Those two really grind my gears because it's so simple things like, you know, in non-white settings, men and women are equal. Oh my God. And then it's like, tested. It's tested. Do you know that? Do you understand this? And people still fight it. Okay, anyway. So basically how I survive in these institutions, yep, I gotta put up with that. Gotta pull up with this bullshit. Yep, thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And that's a good call to make to individuals in the crowd today to educate. There's a lot of resources that are out there that exist that people can find. A lot of it both being online, a lot of it being within a lot of research that Indigenous people have put in to these types of things. So thank you very much, Kennedy, for putting that call to action out there for folks to take away. And we'll move to Kaylee.
Thank you. So like I said, I just recently started my post-secondary. I actually graduated of last year in June, so this is very new to me. And so I'm taking victim services online through SAS Polytechnic. And so doing that actually, it's still much so like my regular high school. The papers are very colonialized and the assignments are like that. And it seems as if Indigenous culture isn't very into those assignments, which is weird because right now I'm studying criminal justice, of where you think it would be more detailed in those books and in our assignments. And I think we had one assignment on the Gladue case and it was worth only 2%. And the other assignments are either worth 5 to 20. So I thought that was kind of a little bit weird of how that would be worth 2% as compared to the other assignments, which are worth more percent. But I'm very grateful because right now in Moose Jaw at the police station, there's a lady named Donna Blondeau, and she's a victim services coordinator, and she's also Indigenous. And so I volunteer with her twice a week, so I really enjoy working with somebody that's actually Indigenous and also a woman, because you don't see that so often, especially in those departments. So I really enjoy that I'm able to work with her, but yet also take those classes as well and talk to Donna, because I can almost incorporate into my culture as well and kind of decolonialize that information that they're teaching me. But so far I find, even though I'm not in classroom, that is very much so just like the school I was taking last year. So that's my part on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaylee. And I think it's also a good reminder for folks to know that other resources that exist out there are our elders, the old ones that have a lot of knowledge, that offer a lot to our communities. But they too must be given the appropriate compensation for the work that they do. And that's a good reminder that wanted to note as well. And we'll move to Andre.
Just a quick question. Is Colette Begonia still here? Does anybody know? I don't believe so. This is my first time actually hearing from her ever since I was in grade 4. I believe she taught me at grade 4 at Fairhaven High School. And I distinctly remember her entirely inspiring me throughout my elementary school. So it was pretty awesome that she's speaking here. Hopefully I'll get to see her eventually. When it comes to Indigenous identity, like I said earlier, I was not raised through my ceremonies and traditional teachings. However, there comes a point in time in your life when you're an adult where you need to take full responsibility of who you are. You need to take full responsibility to learn your language, to learn your ceremonies and the teachings and the laws that we carry as Indigenous people. And education is one of the tools that, in a very profound way, our ancestors had given up their lives. They had suffered a long time negotiating treaties. And for us to have that right to education systems in order to survive in this ever-changing world, it's important to use that and to take it seriously and to remember who you're honoring and acknowledge them when you're in those colonial institutions. And it's a truth and it's a reality that we do sacrifice who we are in our identity in a lot of these cases when we choose to come to these schools. If it was my decision, if I really had the choice, I could be on the land right now. I could be learning how to hunt. I could be learning my language. I could be doing all of these things instead of going into these schools. However, I know better that in this world, in order to build a beautiful life for my family and my children, I need to be educated. And we need to honor those ancestors who had made it possible for us to have education through the spirit and intent of our treaties. And I want to encourage the young people that are out there that no matter where you come from, no matter what kind of background or upbringing that you had, whether or not you learned ceremonies or your language or not, if you put as much effort and work into our ceremonies and learning your language as you do in university systems, all of us up here on this panel right now would probably be speaking Cree, right? And so it's important that we need to hold ourselves accountable to honoring our ancestors and using education, but never losing who we are. It's our responsibility to learn our languages and our ceremonies and practice them.
Yes, thank you, Andre. Beautifully said. It's so important to recognize that education comes in many forms, and that upon these lands here on Treaty 6, we had many traditional ways of education and educating our young as Indigenous people, as nations. And it's important because I was privileged enough to have a father who did not necessarily complete education in this society or in Western society, but did gain a lot of knowledge from the land and built a relationship with the land to gain that things like fish or to gain moose to survive off these lands. And that's an important knowledge to honor as well with the language. So thank you very much for that reminder, Andre. And we'll head over to Autumn.
Thank you so much. And I apologize for my coughing. Holding it in only makes it worse. And laughing too, so don't make me laugh. Which was something I was going to say before you started making us laugh is, and something I brought up before this panel is, right now laughing is triggering my cough, and I was saying that this is a panel where we won't have too much laughter going on, because I always say, because young people especially mean business, because this is our life that we're trying create. And that's what I think of in regards to secondary school. I hate school so much. Like, I hate it. I hate being in class. I hate doing schoolwork. And I always question, like, why can't I just be out in my community volunteering and working, and why do I have to go to school? And I'm already volunteering for these organizations or working for different organizations that I love and I want to be a part of, and why do I need to go to school? And I realize and I recognize, and I'm so grateful for SUNTEP for paying my tuition and realizing that that's something that a lot of people don't have, and trying to make the best of that. And with that as well, finding my culture and learning more about Métis history through SUNTEP and using my post-secondary as a tool to be closer to my Indigenous identity. I think it was in my second year I decided to go into a mainstream class. In SUNTEP we have a lot smaller classes when we're not taking electives in regards to our education, like the College of Education. And so I went into a mainstream education class there, and I was the only Indigenous person in the classroom. I think there was about 35, 40 people. It was like a science, teaching science in the classroom curriculum, something like that. And in SUNTEP, they teach you how to incorporate Métis culture and history into every subject, not just in history, but including that in math and science. And it's not actually that hard to do at all if you're creative enough or can search on Google, honestly. And I noticed in that classroom that if I didn't bring it up, it wasn't brought up at all, how to include Indigenous content into the science curriculum, which was something that I thought was really scary. And hopefully we are able to challenge that in the future, because SUNTEP produces, and ITEP as well, only a certain amount of teachers. And if we're not in every classroom, then how are we ensuring the students in elementary school are truly learning and getting a education around Indigenous ways of knowing and ways of learning, and teaching them the true history of Indigenous people. And that's something that I noted that, if I wasn't saying it, nobody was saying it. And in regards to the compromises I make to my Indigenous identity, something that was touched on already was, what is my energy level today? When I go to this classroom, do I have the energy? Did I get good enough sleep to be the one voicing these concerns? Because if I don't, who's going to say them? And having that burden on me in that classroom. And it may only be 35 students, but a lot of the times when I did say something, it seemed to be, there were head nods in the classroom and smiles, and people really seemed to appreciate what I was sharing. And I just worry that if everyone doesn't actively take time to incorporate that in everything they do, then we're going to have a lot of younger students growing up without that knowledge, and that's something that I'm really scared of. So two sides, SUNTEP, yes. I'm very thankful that I get to learn more about my culture. Mainstream education college and mainstream university, I don't know if that's something that's as prevalent.
Thank you, Autumn. Thank you so much. You know, there's a lot of words that we've begun to use in our daily language. Words such as reconciliation, words such as Indigenous ways of knowing. And one of those words is also decolonization. That is something that has become a big topic amongst schools, amongst universities, amongst workplaces and businesses throughout the city here in Saskatoon, or even in places throughout Canada. And so I want to give an opportunity for our panel to answer this question. What does decolonization mean to you? How does it look? And is it achievable? And how can we make it achievable in a colonial setting? And we'll start off with our panelist, Kaylee, over there, if you want to spend some time explaining.
Yeah, thank you. So what decolonization means to me is that it means all my people will feel loved and they'll feel worthy. It means the hurt and pain isn't a part of their daily life. I see many people alone with addictions and helplessness being alone with their trauma that they carry from these schools, and also their family members that attended these schools. It means by me and my mom not having to worry about the conversation of missing and murdered Indigenous women, knowing that I have a 6 times higher rate of missing and a 12 times higher rate in Saskatchewan of being murdered than a non-Indigenous woman. I wear the skirt in honor of missing and murdered Indigenous women. On my skirt here it's red, and there's the grandmother print underneath, and then I represented my Kushi, and she's praying to the moon. So that's what my skirt represents, is a missing murdered Indigenous women and girls. I don't want to have those discussions when I have a daughter someday. It means not being followed in a store because of the color of my skin and my culture. I've also been followed around the store because of the color of my skin, and I was accused of also stealing one time. It means making changes in our education system. I was asked to speak at the School Board Association annual meeting, and I shared my experiences of being scared of school and changes that need to happen in this division. A year ago, my high school didn't offer a Native Studies 30 class. I didn't want to take a colonized history. The only way I could take it was online, and it would cost us a total of $500. My school board was trying to promote reconciliation throughout our schools, but when my mom and I had went to the director of online studies, he had, in a moment of 2 seconds, he had said, no, we won't be able to pay for this course, you have to pay for it by yourself. So my family and I, we had paid for the $500 course and had luckily got the funding back from our reservation. So that just kind of shows of how our school board doesn't necessarily care, because they didn't want me to get an education in my own history class, and the $500 would be the point that would stop me from taking that class. It means future Indigenous children not being scared of school the way I was. It means not having as many Indigenous children in care that there is now. It means our families becoming healthy and our child welfare system not creating more jobs because of Indigenous children. We need allies. We need to stand up. We need to create safe spaces for us to share. We need to keep talking and educating. We can only achieve if we work together. And my biggest thing is that we need to learn to educate. So whenever I talk, I hope that you learn and that you listen, and then hopefully you'll be able to tell somebody else what you have learned, and that you can educate others as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kaylee, and as well, thank you so much for your advocacy and spreading word about a very systemic issue on missing and murdered Indigenous women, even through what you wear. That's a very big statement and a bold statement to share in a crowd like this. So thank you very much for that. Andre, if you wanted to take some time to explain your perspective on decolonization.
Sure. So my perspective on decolonization really relates back to the spirit and intent of our treaties. And what I would encourage each and every one of you to do when considering decolonizing your spaces is to maybe speak to an elder, or even attending conferences such as this, to understand what the spirit and intent is of our treaty rights. And so the written treaty is one thing, and however, the spirit of survival and negotiations that our old people had done for many years is another. And what I'm getting at is that our institutions, such as universities, schools, any kind of organizations, are often, when it comes to decolonizing, they will do what's comfortable for them. They will do what's comfortable to do in their organizations. However, when you consider honoring the spirit and intent of our treaties, I would consider that the embodiment of decolonization, if our treaties were honored, if they were implemented. And so if you were to ask yourselves, through the spirit and intent of our treaties, if education was honored and respected and implemented in this country, to what extent would that hold a university accountable to Indigenous students that want an education? In what way is education accessible to kids in isolated communities? So when you consider decolonization, we have to become uncomfortable. We have to really educate ourselves, not only by what's written, but what's unwritten, what's oral, what are the teachings from Indigenous knowledge keepers. And one of the main ways of doing that is the first is to be uncomfortable, is to make decisions that will push the envelope, because I can tell you right now, at this point in time, whatever we're doing when it comes to decolonizing is not enough. So thank you.
Thank you, Andre. The spirit and intent of treaties, and that's something that we need to return to. Thank you for those powerful words in that statement. Autumn, would you like to share a little bit?
No. So I'm sure everyone here is familiar with Lego. You have all these tiny blocks, you build something beautiful, and then you very hesitantly take it apart to build something again. And I think that's, when I think of decolonization, I think of that, because I don't think we can decolonize colonial institutions without really taking apart their very foundations of what they are. And I also think that a lot of the times decolonization becomes this one-sided conversation with Indigenous people being left to kind of make all the moves and make the changes, and it's really put on Indigenous people to kind of front all the and do all the grunt work for that and the groundwork for that. And I think even if we had an Indigenous person in every single seat in the House of Commons, it would still be Indigenous people in the House of Commons in a colonial setting, in a colonial institution. So regardless of how many people in the room, if the very foundations of what it is are colonial, I don't think that we can decolonize that, which might not be a very popular opinion. And that's why I think that we have to be brave to take apart and to dissect and to look at how our organization runs, from smaller organizations right up to government, and be willing to take away parts, to add in parts, to make it this beautiful piece together of colonial settlers and Indigenous people coming together. Because something I hear a lot is, especially from settler people, is, well, I was just born here, it's not my fault, why is it my fault as a white person or on this land that you suffered these traumas? And it's something that's what I hear a lot, and it's, okay, you're right, it may not be your fault, but there's still something that you need to uphold and promises you need to uphold, and let's work together to create something that works for everyone. So that we're equal here, and that we are holding each other up and we're holding each other accountable, instead of having these power structures in place that pushes Indigenous people and people of color down. I think decolonization means being brave to take apart structures and rebuild them into something beautiful.
Beautiful. That's important to remember, folks. Please make sure that you note that there's a lot of power dynamics involved in this. And so it's important to raise and build up Indigenous folks like the people that we have on this panel, to raise them up, to build them up, so that we have not only representation, but we have voices that may not say the most popular thing, but that get our voice out there and our perspectives as Indigenous people, because we rightfully belong at those tables, and that's important to say and to share. Thank you. Kennedy, if you wanted to close up that question.
Sure. So when I think of decolonization, I think about it in many different forms. I think about it at the individual level, and I also think about it in the institutional level. And I see it as, how do I say this? I'll start off with how I view it. So actually today, when I was coming here, I didn't want to pay for parking, so I decided to take a cab. And the moment I got into the cab, I wrote down the cab number in my phone. I wrote down the license plate number. I wrote down a description of who was driving me, and I was scared. And I had my phone in my hand the entire time, and I was just watching and making sure that he was driving me to TCU Place and not taking any other turns, because there were so many instances where people are, Indigenous women are stolen through taxis. And I remember hearing recordings of these women phoning someone and asking for help and no one believing them, and then they show up and their bodies are found. And so when I think about decolonization, it means not being afraid of every little activities that people who aren't Indigenous would not fear. So me, as an Indigenous woman, I don't go outside at night, period. If I'm going to my car, I go inside. I cannot walk outside. I cannot walk down the street. Even if something's a block away, I have to drive. I will never go outside in the dark because I am so conditioned to fear it, even though I miss the beauty of the stars and I miss the beauty of seeing the sparkling snow on the ground in the dark and smelling that fresh air of the night sky. But that was stripped away due to fear. And for good reason, because I'd rather stay inside and be safe than go out there and experience what is so normalized in this society. And especially, and I also think of the police. I have no criminal record. All I do is just look at memes at home and go to school. That's all I ever do. So why am I so scared of the police? Why is whenever they're behind me, I breathe? Because they don't protect Indigenous people. They protect white people from Indigenous people, even though we do nothing wrong. And what decolonization means to me is not living in constant fear. And again, that requires institutional change and also individual change. And the question, is it possible in your lifetime? It has to be. I know that it's easy to see this huge concept of decolonization. Oh my God, it's a whole system, what do we do? Okay, well, you can't just blame white people and say everything's bad and then not give us solutions. What do we do? If it was as easy as an Indigenous policy, as an Indigenous inclusivity act that you add in your organizations, racism and colonization would have been solved by now. There would be no systemic issues if it was that easy. So people can't look and say, well, you can't just criticize opinion and not give solutions. But that's a collective thing. Like as she said, when it comes to things like reconciliation, it's a two-way street. But it's almost not an equal street, because a lot of us, we know that like our ways are, how do I say this? Instead of saying that, I'm gonna go the other way. It's not a two-way street, because me saying I hate the police is not as dangerous and not the same as a police officer saying I hate Indigenous people. It is not the same as me saying, oh, I hate white people, as it is to a white superior group saying I hate Indigenous people, because that has dangerous ramifications that are imposed on us unequally. So decolonization means to me someone holding others accountable, especially peoples in positions of power. And along with power becomes erasure. So that's another theme that I want to touch on, because throughout all of history, even with the treaties, people view Canada, the creation of Canada, as with the Constitution Act, but the way Canada was formed was through the treaties, because we were on this land first. And with treaty education, people neglect to even see that we're the reason, we are almost half the reason why Canada was even made, if not all the reason why Canada was even possible. But we're completely erased from history. I remember going through school, and the only any sort of education that I had on Indigenous people was in grade 4 for a spelling test, and what we got was bow and arrow. It's ridiculous. And me and my stepmom, we still laugh, not my stepmom, my mom. We don't say step around here. Doesn't exist. But we just remember laughing about it and looking back, and even throughout high school, again, it's taught as an elective. When Indigenous ways of knowing is every single thing. We've always had maths, we've always had sciences, we've always had the arts, we've had every single institutional subject was created through Indigenous people's ways of knowing and Indigenous people's ways of lives, but they were taken and stripped and put on a stamp, oh, this is the right way, this is a white people thing, and then Indigenous ways of knowing is an elective, because the way they live is like a white way. And really what decolonization means to me is just rewriting ourselves back into history, right? Rewriting ourselves back into the big narrative, because we are not just a segment of society, we're integrated in every single aspect of society, and we have to make it more inclusive. And again, that is highly institutional change, except that is not something that can be done today, but what can be done today is the initiatives that individuals take in order to make that happen, and realize that they're also upholding these structures in colonial settings without even knowing it. So again, what people say, it's not enough to not be racist, you have to be anti-racist, because if you're not, then you're living a racist life. Period. You can't be neutral in these situations. That doesn't exist, because if you pretend to be an outsider, it's just like a bystander. That bullying is still happening, except you're just the one who's not stopping it. And when people say, like, what does it look like? I see it happening. People say it's some far off thing, but again, institutional change, and we're not just gonna go back and like rip down all the buildings, wear all these different things, hunting again. We're not going to go back to like all the ways that a lot of settlers think that we want. We just want to be included. We want to be included in the ways, and we want to benefit and not be exploited. It's not like we don't want to be a part of economics and things like that, because we do. Cultures evolve, and they have evolved, and we just want to be a part of it. But I do see it happening, and I see it's not something that's so far off. It's not something that's so out of our reach and impossible. It's not a hypothetical. It's something that's happening right now, and that can be done even better. But I see it, and I see it again, like I mentioned, in my siblings being proud of their hair, coming home and not being bullied that it's long, and just being so proud. Look at my beautiful brown skin. I see it happening every day, and it gives me so much hope, but we can't stop there. If your organization has, oh, we have an anti-racist policy, we have anti-racist training, cool, but you don't deserve a pat on the back, because that should be normal. That's not something to be celebrated. That should be a staple. And again, like, you don't get to be, oh my God, you're such an amazing person because you're not racist. Are you joking? Like, that should just, again, be a staple. Like, it should be a norm. And we don't have to hold people on these pedestals just because they care about another human's well-being. So decolonization looks to me like normalization of just looking at people like as people, as caring about people, as having compassion. It also looks like involving Indigenous people and realizing that we all are different. There's hundreds of languages, hundreds of cultures, hundreds of different identities, hundreds of different ways we look and opinions. You cannot just make a policy clumped Indigenous policy, because that again is a colonial word. You can't just look at someone as the same identity, because we're not. We're all different. And you can't just go to one Indigenous person in the room and say, this is our person, this is our quotas met, we are a great company, because you're not yet. There's so much more to do, but I do feel hopeful. I feel like it's happening right before our very eyes, but that doesn't mean we can stop.
I don't know about you folks, but I can listen to these four amazing individuals all day long. I want to say thank you to Kaylee, Kennedy, Autumn, and Andre for sharing your stories, for sharing your perspectives, and also sharing a little bit about yourselves. To the folks today that are here for the Wîcihitowin conference, I want to say thank you, and how grateful I am to have learned from you this afternoon. And I hope that you folks have good opportunities lined up after this in terms of education, in terms of being able to speak further to these types of issues that face our communities and our nations and our people. Thank you so much to you wonderful panelists. Thank you very much for sharing yourselves with us. And thank you to you folks for tuning in and for being with us here this afternoon. It was a great pleasure moderating such a wonderful panel of individuals, and I look forward to the conversations that we have ahead. Thank you so much. Nanaskamun. Hai hai.
On behalf of the Wîcihitowin Committee, we'd like to offer you all these tokens of our appreciation.